Last session, we introduced a battle plan that gives us a three-step process to help us fight against the idols of our life. Admit the struggle, identify the lie, and replace with the truth. And guys, we can apply that to any idol. And today, we've chosen to focus on a particular manhood trap that can ensnare any one of us. Whether we're 25 or 75, we're all susceptible. And that's sexual lust, and specifically internet pornography. Guys, this is a huge deal in our culture. The numbers and statistics we're going to hear are mind-boggling. That's because this stuff is everywhere. It's in our face, and if we don't choose to be proactive in fighting this fight, we're just inviting temptation to our doorstep. So, let's get started.
In the last three sessions, we've journeyed deep below the surface to look at the core temptations in our hearts, the places where most men never go. We dug deep to look at our fundamental motivations and the deep idols that are driving our external actions and behaviors. In the next few sessions, we want to return to the surface to look at some of the common struggles that tempt most men and can become traps for any one of us. In this session, we're going to look directly at what is perhaps the most formidable and potent temptation in the life of a man. You already know where I'm headed. Today, we're going to confront the issue of sexual temptation. Sexual fulfillment is one of our deepest needs as men. It goes to our core, our inner being. For this reason, it is also a place where we're most vulnerable, where we can experience the most shame and exhibit the greatest secrecy. Sexuality has the potential to be a source of either great energy in a man's life or great frustration, great fulfillment or great disappointment, great freedom or utter enslavement. When pursued according to God's noble pathway, sexuality can be healthy and healing. When pursued according to Satan's shadow pathway, it only leads to hiding deeper and deeper darkness, and eventually a dark prison. We could have taken this session in multiple directions. We could have talked about each of the sexual temptations I've already mentioned. But guys, today we are facing a relatively new form of sexual temptation, which has become a pandemic among men, really a worldwide pandemic. It's the enemy's latest innovation, a very old temptation. Now, of course, lust has been an issue that men of every generation has faced. On the other hand, no previous generation has had an instant, on-demand, and infinite supply available to them at the click of a button. In the past, you had to go out of your way to acquire pornography. You had to risk being seen in public. But today, you have to go out of your way to avoid sexual images and pornography. You don't have to find it finds you. Perceived anonymity and pervasive accessibility have made pornography a bigger problem than ever before. And guys, the statistics prove that this problem is reaching staggering proportions. We're going to do two things. First, we're going to answer the question, why is internet pornography such a pandemic among men? Then we are going to spend the rest of our time figuring out how to fight fire with fire. How do we use the framework we've already learned and our battle plan to go to war with this issue? Why is internet pornography such a problem? The answer is twofold. As men, we have susceptible brains and disconnected hearts. You see, God designed our brains to be stimulated visually by the beauty of a female body. Just like He intended for us to enjoy food, He intended for us to delight in the bodily form of our wives, and for her to enjoy our enjoyment. When this happens in marriage, things are as they should be. It's one of the noble privileges of marriage. And scientists tell us that when men are stimulated visually in this way, All kinds of pleasure-inducing chemicals are released in their brains. However, just like food, this enjoyment can be abused. When a man views pornography, these pleasure chemicals are released in amounts that far exceed normal levels. As one author put it, it's like a neurological tsunami bathing the brain. You feel captivated, anxious, awed, intoxicated, energized, alive. Guys, exposing our brains to pornography is like exposing gasoline to a spark. There is an unpreventable explosion that's going to occur. When we abandon ourselves to pornography, reality has a way of fading to the background, even in the face of the practical consequences that are likely to follow. Consequences like the development of a consistent habit or even addiction. And given the powerful effects of pornography on the male brain, we can understand how this happens. It's something men return to again and again to seek control, significance, and comfort. Another practical consequence is that to continue getting the same degree of pleasure and the same release of chemicals, according to scientists, you have to continually ratchet up the novelty and the variety of the images. In other words, you quickly build up a tolerance to the same old stuff you've already seen. And to get the old high, you'll have to push the boundaries. As you can imagine, this can easily create a downward spiral into a dark abyss and deviant sexual interest. So how does this knowledge about the male brain help us? Well, to begin, it gives us scientific proof of what we've known all along. Our bodies, and especially our brains, respond intensely to a naked woman. As we've seen, the science also indicates that pornography puts this response in hyperdrive. Like a street drug, it's engineered to create an intense, mind-altering, and addictive pseudo-reality. That's why some researchers have compared the high of pornography to the high of crack cocaine. In other words, we are not playing with something harmless or safe. This stuff is liquid nitrogen. It's raw nuclear material with the potential for catastrophic destruction. It's kryptonite. It will destroy your relationships, your perception of women, and your sex drive. Consistent consumption of it will literally alter your brain and hinder your ability to experience normal pleasures. It's cost many a man his job, his marriage, and his self-respect. One takeaway, that you must take every precaution to avoid the tentacles and magnetic field of this deadly predator. Because as a man, you are extremely, extremely susceptible to its lies. So act accordingly. To not take any precautions in our society, where sexually explicit material is so pervasive, is the functional equivalent of saying yes to pornography. This information about the brain also tells us something else. We are not alone or weird in our attraction to it. Biologically speaking, all men are drawn to this stuff. Every man in this room shares in this brokenness because of the fall. You are not alone. This should strike shame at its root, because we are all in the same boat and have the same capacity for this stuff. What's in your heart is in my heart and in the heart of every man. Listen, as Dr. Adrian Hickman shares some additional insight for us. Dr. Hickman is an expert in this field. He founded and leads the Capstone Treatment Center, where he works every day with young men with pornography addiction.
Well, a man's brain is so susceptible to pornography because, one, God made men to be aroused by women. A brain, no matter whose brain it is susceptible to the reward center, the pleasure center being activated. There's nothing any human in the world does that's not related to dopamine in their brain. And there's 40 or 50 or so neurotransmitters. There's 5 kinds of dopamine. But the bottom line is dopamine is the pleasure center, the reward center. Looking at women, we're going to be prone to do it. And if you can do it in a way that manipulates the system God built to flood the neurotransmitters, meaning to take them above what's normal or above what can happen in a normal activity, now you're really getting into something that's going to be magnetic, that's going to pull someone into an addiction, distort all reality because it's so powerful. But when you take crystal meth, crack cocaine, moving porn for a male, that has an 1100% dopamine potentiation. Every man is susceptible to it. And I believe every man has those days that if he had access to it, he would go to it. So one thing is for Christian men to be aware that there will be days when, if it was present, I would look at it. And you never know when that's the day that the road forks and you go down a hole that takes you far away from who you are and who you want to be in life. So one, you got to play good defense because you know it's true. It's to me about 1,000,000 times more impactful than smoking cigarettes. The odds on the pornography thing are much greater. You play with this fire, it's like the ability for it to hook you and reel you in is even more powerful. At Capstone Treatment Center, we base everything we do on Christian intimacy theory. And we just defined it ourselves as every human being was created in the image of God to love and be loved at a core-to-core level of intimacy and to fulfill the dreams of God, which are the purposes and the gifts that he gave us, Ephesians 2:10. And if you're not hitting on those things, if you're not having that intimacy develop, if you're not fulfilling, something inside of you, like John Eldredge says, ask yourself what makes you really come to life. God wrote things on our hearts to do. And it's not just about talent. It's about talent used in mission, stuff. If that's not being done, there's an empty spot. And you talk to people all over the country in different roles, and people are searching for something. If you really get to have that conversation, what's really going on with you? People are searching. They're searching for some kind of fulfillment. If you're getting some of that in the healthy, God-blessed ways, you are less susceptible to porn or drugs or whatever else. If you're not getting it, now you're playing Russian roulette with it. Anything that causes dopamine flooding and the other floodings of the neurotransmitters, they're called intimacy disorders. They're in the absence of intimacy and that connection, that's what gives you a surrogate or an illusion that you really are connected. The reason porn affects intimacy in a negative way is twofold, and it's a paradox. Because the first way it does is that it gives you a surrogate for intimacy. That's why they call all addictions an intimacy disorder, because it's giving you feelings in your brain that are the same feelings released in intimate relationships. The deepest way that it hurts relationships is when you go against the plan of God in anything, you cannot win. Basically, it's like you can't defy gravity. And we've got grace and forgiveness and the cross and all those things. Yes, that's true. But it doesn't take away from formulas in life that are absolute truths you can't change. You can't drop something and it go up. It's going to go down. That's the way gravity works. You go against God's plan, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be something that's going to be a price to pay. It can't work that way. So you go find this wonderful euphoric feeling in pornography. And guys that are doing it are like, it's so much easier. I'm not going to try to work it out with a woman, with my wife, etc. But then after the cycle of use is over, when the neurotransmitters crash, when they're depleted, when the thrill is gone, so to speak, then that's where shame comes in.
Now, internet pornography is a pandemic today, not just because of our susceptible brains. We are also easy targets because we have disconnected hearts. Pornography is not just a sex problem. Just like a gambler doesn't simply have a money problem, and a food addict's needs go beyond mere food. Similarly, struggles with pornography and sex betray a deeper need in us, a deep need for intimacy. Intimacy with God and intimacy with others. Guys, for a lot of us, our hearts are disconnected, whether it's because of our wounded past, false beliefs, or fear of being truly known. We disconnect from others in exchange for isolation. But our need for intimacy is always going to express itself somehow. And in our self-imposed isolation, we turn to escapes and the counterfeit intimacy of pornography. Show me a man disconnected from God and others, and I'll show you a man either struggling with or extremely vulnerable to sexual temptation. But show me a man connected to God and trustworthy men, and I'll show you a man nobly fighting the battle with lust. We have susceptible brains and disconnected hearts. So how do we break free from this struggle? How do we deal with this issue? Remember, we looked to scripture last session and developed a battle plan that will help us fight this fight. We admit the struggle, identify the lie, and replace with the truth. Let's see what it would look like to apply our battle plan to these specific issues. First, we've got to admit the sin to God and pursue ruthless honesty, beginning with ourselves and then with trustworthy men. As we've said many times, we have to have men in our lives who are asking us the tough questions about lust, who know where we've been and what we've been up to, who know what we've been looking at and what we've been thinking about. Men who aren't shocked by us and who don't shame us. Likewise, we have to be men who are unshockable and safe so others can share with us. You see, as a man, you are going to experience losses, wounds, and frustrations in life. And there's a need in all of us to share those experiences with men who love us. When we don't share, when our hearts are disconnected, when we live all alone and in isolation, we'll often find ourselves turning to pornography to medicate our pain. But when we share and remove the mask, when we courageously pursue authenticity and intimacy with other men, that is the first step in trumping the need to medicate. It breaks the cycle and provides space for truth and hope to invade. For our second step, we have to do the hard work of identifying the lies that we are believing. We have to identify the broken promises of pornography. Too often, we just focus on the acting out and the behavior. We tell guys they just need more self-control or to just stop it. But as we've already seen, you can't just focus on the branches of behavior. You have to go below the surface to the roots of the beliefs and idols. Counselor Michael John Cusick tells us that to change, we have to go beyond the what of our sin. I can't stop looking at porn, and get to the why. Porn promises to meet some need in me. And identifying the lies of pornography are crucial to breaking its power. So we have to do the hard work of uncovering the specific lies we're believing and tracing this behavior back to its root. Remember, there is always a broken promise of one or more of our deep idols at the root of pornography. I had to learn that the hard way.
I think the deceptive part about the idol of lust, the idol of pornography, is that you minimize it. Because as a guy, that's just what guys do. I mean, what I do in my private world has nothing to do with anybody else, so what's the big deal? It's just me. It doesn't involve anybody else. And so for a long time, I began to think that issue of pornography didn't have an effect on anybody. It just was between me alone. Who else did it bother? But what I did not realize, and only would later realize, is that it was slowly eating away at me on the inside. It was messing up my relationship with the Lord, because I have this sin, I have this weight on me, and I'm almost using this idol as a substitute for God, because I'm using this idol to bring me pleasure, using this idol to look forward to when everybody leaves, using this idol to go to when I'm tired, when I'm bored, when I'm disconnected. That's where I go. And so it was just kind of eating away my relationship with God. But then on top of that, with my wife and with others, with women in period. One of the things I learned about my struggle with my idol is that sin loves to live in dark places. And so for me, in a dark place, in my own personal life, in my own private world, nobody knows, that's where my sin and my idol begin to grow. And so I didn't recognize it as an idol until I began to come clean with some close friends, with a close mentor and others. And it was there I began to realize the seriousness of the issue. You know, whenever we struggle with sin, the reality is that we can talk ourselves into anything. We can justify anything. We can explain anything. And so it wasn't an idol for me. It was just something I was doing, something I had a right to do, you know, not bothering anybody. And so I always minimized it. I had no idea that there was something deeper going on in my life that was causing me to manifest itself in this pursuit of lust and pornography. And so it was then, as I began to work through my struggle, as I began to try and find out, how do I overcome this? How do I break free of this? How do I wrestle with this effectively? As I began to work my way through this, I just started studying. I started asking questions of others. And I began to really uncover that my issue really was significance. That there were some wounds in my life that caused me not to feel valuable, not to feel significant, not to feel important. There were some issues from my childhood, issues that I reproduced throughout my life, where I was always looking for validation. And so pornography, lust gave me that validation. Even in a fantasy kind of relationship, it gave me a validation and a satisfaction that I'm valued. How the two related to each other, I never would have realized. But then when I began to study, that's what I discovered. Part of my reality is that I was looking for validation, looking for significance, and I found it in this warped way of sexuality. That with pornography, I could have it when I wanted to. I could find whatever I was looking for, and so it provided that. And until I began to realize that I am valuable in Him, until I begin to realize that I am significant because He says I am, not because of what someone else says, not because of how I feel about that day, but I'm significant because of what God says. I'm significant because of what Christ did for me on the cross. Until I found significance, if it wasn't pornography, it was going to be something else. It was going to be my job. It was going to be money. It was going to be education. It was going to be some other idol, surface idol would surface until I found my significance in Him. God can take appetites away. God can take the taste out of your mouth. And it's nothing but God that gave me a greater appetite for Him and began to take it away. So I don't even desire. I mean, there are times when I'm not saying, lust is there every day of my life is a fight. Whether it's an attractive woman that walks by or a movie that I see and I say, man, it's a struggle, but God has given me so much victory. He has given me an appetite for Him, an appetite for my woman, my wife, an appetite for the destiny the legacy I want my children to have, and the appetite for what I want my church to know about me and what I want men to know about what God can do. God has done a work in my life that I can't give credit to. And so it's not overcoming pornography and battling and struggling with this. It's not just having a whole bunch of standards. You know, I don't do this, that's part of it. Yes, you need an internet filter, and yes, you need to not go certain places, and yes, you need certain things not in your house. That's important, but it's more than that. It's those barriers, but it's also believing and trusting God. That God, I don't need this to satisfy me. I don't need this to make me feel like I'm a man. I don't need this to get, I don't need this in order for me to feel like I am satisfied. I don't need this for masturbation. I don't need any of that. What I need is you. And if I become more satisfied, if I replace my love for that with my love for you, then I will find what I need most, what I desire most, and I will gain a joy in my life that will be greater than anything else I can experience. So I'm chasing after him. I'm chasing after him.
Now, we come to the fun part. We get to turn from the problem to the solution. We get to move from the broken promises of lust to a vision for something better, a hope for a different life. And like we said in session 3, you can't just remove something from your life. You always have to replace it with something better. And that something is God. His promises in Scripture, his noble pathways, the life he offers that makes our hearts come alive. In your training guide, we've given you some verses that contain some of God's amazing life-giving promises to us that we all need to know and carry in our hearts. Write this down. The power to say no to pornography is in being convinced that God himself and the pathway of authentic manhood is more satisfying and more lasting than the lure of lust. Our chief enemy is the lie that says sin will make our future happier. Our chief weapon is the truth that says God will make our future happier. Men, the role of God's word is to lay out for us that more satisfying future. And just like Jesus did when he was tempted by the fleeting promises of Satan in the wilderness, we can replace with the truth. Let me give you just one example of this. On several occasions during his earthly ministry, Jesus said that the greatest commandments and the path to life is found in loving God and loving others. In contrast, pornography and lust are consumptive, self-oriented, companionless, and solitary activities. When we are tempted to lust and tempted to look at pornography, when we are tempted to turn to the inward prison of self, we can hold on to those truths of Scripture, remembering that the more satisfying path is in turning outward toward God and others. And when we begin renewing our minds by turning to these truths, we find an entirely new strength in our hearts. Now, there are many other passages from Scripture that can help us. We've just given you a few examples. We must load our minds and hearts with the ammunition of Scripture's most satisfying promises. There are also some other practical things we can do as we fight the battle. First, we can pursue intimacy with God. Like we said above, pornography and lust aren't just a sex problem. They're intimacy problems. And your struggle with lust is really a thirst for something deeper. G.K. Chesterton said that every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. You see, connecting with God will satisfy your soul in a way that will begin to extinguish the flicker of lust. So pursue intimacy with him through prayer, worship, Bible study, journaling, solitude, fasting, and reflection. Second, you will also gain strength by pursuing heart-level community with other trustworthy men. And for those who are married, also with your wife. James 5:16 encourages us to confess our sins to one another, that we can be healed. We got to be talking to each other in order to move past this. Here's the third thing you can do. Make the decision to chase bigger dreams with your life. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote that the pursuit of purity is not about the suppression of lust, but about the reorientation of one's life to a larger goal. God has called authentic men everywhere to fight the good fight, to stand against evil, to protect the weak, the poor, and the oppressed, and to share the good news about Jesus Christ with others. There are countless ways you can change your life focus to something bigger than you. And when you're actively pursuing a bigger God vision for your life, you'll find your passion for Him and His vision increasing and your attention to lust decreasing. You're going to take some hard-hitting punches along the way, but you must recover quickly, regain your footing, re-enter the fray, and most importantly, run toward Jesus with all of your heart. Store His promises in your mind and rest in His grace and His infinite pleasures. Guys, you know, there's so much shame and guilt associated with this trap. So often in our lives, we struggle in this area, but we never come clean with anyone. And so we walk around like everything is fine, while on the inside, this pornography and lust is eating us inside out. And so instead of us running, what we need to do instead is run to God. And run to God and run to faithful men. Because sin loves to grow in dark places. And it's only in that accountability from God and others that we get the help that we need.
Yeah, there's no doubt when it comes to lust, you're either struggling or you're lying. You know, and I know it's a struggle for you, and I know it's a struggle for you, and it's a struggle for me, and it's a struggle for every man. And so you're either fighting well or you're being slaughtered. I think the helpful thing for me in this session was the fact that when I turned to lust or turned to pornography as an outlet or an escape, it might be because of different reasons. It might be because of a control idol. I want to control a situation. I feel out of control and want to control something for a few minutes, or comfort. I'm just stressed out, tired, and just need a release. Or it might be significance, that I want to feel like I am somebody and not have to argue about that, or just the illusion that provides. And so just that idea of the reasons I may be looking at pornography may be different. And for real transformative work to take place, I've got to do that digging to go, why is it I'm doing what I'm doing? And that's been helpful. It's been helpful.
Yeah. For me, the key thing I took away from this, it's actually one of our discussion questions in our training guide, is that whole point about how we have these susceptible minds and these disconnected hearts. We're wired as men to be visually stimulated. And, that can be either really good or really disastrous for us. But what was that thing we were saying? You said some comedian said, if you've seen one naked woman, what is it?
He said, if you've seen one naked woman, you want to see the rest of them.
That's true. It can really derail us from God's noble pathways. So our minds are susceptible, and if you've got a disconnected heart, disconnected from other men or disconnected from God, well, that guy is probably struggling with pornography on some level. But if you see a guy who is connected with other men and is connected with God, well, that guy has got a chance. And that's where we want to be.
Control is one of those seductive idols.
It's so easy to let a deep need for control manifest itself into the jagged edge of fear.
I had to be driven to hope. Only God can control everything without having anxiety.
Our hearts are like idol factories.
Money as our God, money as our fear, money is the thing that controls us.
We should be quick to admit we can't control our lives, and therefore we're vulnerable at all times in every situation.